Here we go. All right, so this week, the timing works out very well for a number of different events coinciding. I'm going to bring up the PowerPoint. So if anyone is following the news, so this week at CPAC, the world was I don't know what the right word to use is, but had the opportunity to witness this, the golden statue of Donald Trump, which got a lot of attention, and people don't even realize the amazing timing of this, because there were many comparisons made between the golden Donald Trump and the golden calf. And little does the world realize that the golden calf is actually discussed in this week's Torah portion. So the timing is great. The truth is that it's very relevant to our topic of what happened at Sinai, because that happened at Sinai, meaning you would think the major question, actually somebody asked it in one of our first classes, which was that if the Jewish, we've spoken so much about the amazing revelation, the amazing experience of Sinai, the whole nation experienced prophecy, and somehow just 40 days later, that's all it was, 40 days after the great event of Sinai, they're still at Sinai, they're still camped around the mountain, and somehow the events of the golden calf unfold, and it's just a wonderment how such a thing could happen. And what we're going to hopefully talk about now is different approaches to understand what did happen, how could it have happened, and it's really relevant to the commandment that we're currently touching on. We're currently discussing the second commandment, which is, you shall have no other gods besides me. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image or any likeness of what is in the heavens above. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. So we got into the details a little bit of what is encompassed by these commandments. It's really a chunk of 4 different commandments within the second commandment of the 10 commandments. So it's really, that's why they say it's not really 10, it's more like 13, because this one is 4. But the question just builds on itself. The second commandment, which we've learned was heard directly from God. So the people experienced this commandment. Everybody seems to agree that the first 2, there's a debate about the rest, right? But everybody agrees, all the commentators agree that the Jewish people heard the first 2 commandments directly from God. And somehow, just 40 days later, they are serving, to some extent, we'll have to try to explore it more, the golden calf. So that's what we're going to learn about tonight, different approaches to understand it, some takeaways from what happened, lessons. We might touch on some leadership lessons from Moshe, from Moses' handling of the events. So we'll start with just looking at the relevant verses. Again, it works out like it's this week's Torah portion, so it's very appropriate to talk about it. And we'll just read through them, and then we'll get into we'll ask some questions. We'll get into the commentary and hear some different approaches. So it starts really chapter 31, the last verse. It says, when he had finished speaking with him on Mount Sinai, when God finishes speaking with Moshe, he gave Moses the 2 tablets of the testimony, the luchos, written with the finger of God, these special tablets that bear the 10 commandments upon them. And then we break from that scene and we go, the scene shifts to the camp. And the Torah describes the following scene. It says, when the people saw that Moses was late in coming down from the mountain, so he's late when they were expecting him already, and he wasn't back yet. The people gathered against Aaron, against Aharon, Moshe's brother, and they said to him, come on, get up, make us an Elohim. That's the word make us, or an Elohim, I guess we can say, because that's it's not referring to God himself, but a word to describe an idol of some sort. Make us an Elohim that will go before us, because this man, Moses, who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we don't know what has become of him. So since Moshe is gone, we need an Elohim, something, right? Again, it's like a vague, not clear what they're asking for. They're asking for an idol, a god, a leader. Aaron said to them, he said, remove the golden earrings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. So Aaron is apparently, he's all in. That's what it seems, at least from the quick reading of the verse. He says, he says, go to your wives and your sons and your daughters and bring me their earrings. And it says, and all the people stripped themselves the golden earrings that were on their ears and brought them to Aaron. Now, if you're paying close attention, if anybody noticed something between verses 2 and 3, what's different about them? Anyone notice anything?
It doesn't say the sons and the daughters and the wives. It says the people.
Right. It's right. So exactly. So he says, go to them, but then it says the people. It sounds like it was the people that he was talking to, the men who actually ended up removing their own earrings and brought them to Aaron. Excellent. Okay, it continues, and it says, he took them, these rings, these gold rings, and from their hands, and fashioned it with an engraving tool and made it into a molten calf, upon which they said, these are your gods, O Israel, who have brought you up from the land of Egypt. Now, this is an important verse. I just want to bring up the Hebrew in front of me also, because sometimes certain things are lost in translation, or they translate, I grab a translation from wherever. This is probably from Chabad. And the problem with the translation is it restricts you to that one understanding. So I just want to pull up the verse in front of me at the same time. This is chapter 32, and it's verse number 4. Okay, so in the Hebrew, it says, okay, yeah, fine. So he fashioned it. It says he took it from their hands, bound it up in something, and then fashioned. Right. So it's not clear how it got fashioned from the words of the verse. Here they say with an engraving tool. There's other ways to translate this words, but eventually what we have in front of us is this molten calf, upon which they said, and they say, these are your gods in plural. Elah, in the Hebrew, Elah Elohecha Yisrael, in plural. These are your gods, O Israel, who have brought you up from the land of Egypt. So all of a sudden, they're looking at this molten calf, and they're first of all referring to it in the plural, which is interesting because it's just one calf. And they're also attributing the Exodus to it. These are your gods who have brought you up from the land of Egypt. Who said this? Who's talking to who, right? Because it sounds like someone's talking to someone. These are your gods, O Israel. Well, who's talking? Who's saying this to Israel? Unclear. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of it, and he proclaimed and said, tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord. We're going to have a festival, and actually the Lord here uses God's name, God's regular name, Adoshem in the Hebrew, and it uses God's name, so he seems to be referring to God himself, not to some idol. It doesn't say like Elohim, which would be a word for an idol. On the next day, they arose early, offered up burnt offerings, brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and to drink, and they got up to make merry. So there's some kind of celebration in the camp. And then it says the Lord said to Moses, so we flash back to the mountain now, and God says to Moshe, go descend, for your people that you have brought up from the land of Egypt have acted corruptly. Actually, the commentaries say that when God says go descend, he's also telling him that you have descended from your status in some way. If this was able to happen to your people, and you as the leader also, that demonstrates some level of error on your part. So it's not just that the people have descended; it's you yourself have descended in some way. Your success has been diminished. So let's just ask some important questions before we go to the various commentators. So as I asked before, they say, let us make an Elohim, make us an Elohim that will go before us. What do they mean by that? What is this supposed to be? How do we understand Aaron's response? Aharon, he just gets in, remove the earrings, and then he's telling them, he takes it and he puts it into the furnace to be molded into something, and then he says, oh, let's make a celebration tomorrow. So is he game for this? Is he in agreement? And if so, then how do we understand that? Because ultimately Aaron is not going to be really punished for this. In fact, he's gonna end up being the high priest. There's no role of high priest yet. We don't have a tabernacle. We don't have the Mishkan or the temple. There's nothing like that yet. It actually follows the golden calf. But how, was he part of this? Was he a accessory to this? What's going on here? Why a calf of all things? I mean, it could be anything, but it's just, is it just random that it turned out to be a calf? Is there any meaning to that? Why a calf? And the most looming question, which is what I opened with, is just simply how on earth could this happen? If we're at Sinai still. We saw miracles in Egypt. We saw miracles, the splitting of the sea. We saw the revelation at Sinai, tremendous miracles. We heard God speak to us. How do we go from there and so quickly end up in what seems to be an absolutely terrible place? And it's quite clear, God after this says he's gonna destroy the Jewish nation and start all over. Moshe has to pray and says, no, don't destroy them. And ultimately God forgives us. But how did this happen? So let's start with the Talmud, because it's always, you gotta start with the early sources. And we have a couple of opinions expressed in the Talmud. And the Talmud says as follows. Rabbi Yochanan says, were it not for the vav, the letter vav, in the term which brought you up. That's referring to the verse that we just read, which was, these are your gods, O Israel, who have brought you up from the land of Egypt. So in the Hebrew, there's a vav there that makes it plural, basically. So he'elucha. If it was just he'elcha without the vav, it would be singular, but it's plural. So Rabbi Yochanan says, were it not for the plural, then the haters of the Jewish people, which is a euphemism to refer to the Jewish people themselves, would have been sentenced to destruction. If not for the use of the plural in the verse, this is verse 4. If not for the use of the plural in verse 4, the Jewish people would have been sentenced to destruction. I mean, they were sentenced to destruction, but I guess they were forgiven ultimately. I think it's saying there would have been no room for forgiveness for their idol worship. And it explains that the bold is the actual text of the Talmud. The non-bold is the explanation taken in this commentary. So it says, what's the explanation? Since they recognized that God had taken them out of Egypt and thought that he had merely made the golden calf his partner, the Jewish people were spared. This opinion in the Talmud, Rabbi Yochanan is saying, you know what saved them from destruction? The fact that they spoke in the plural. And they said, these are the gods that took you out, plural, that the gods, plural, that took you out. If they had just said, this is the God, that means they're replacing Hashem. They're replacing Hashem, God, with the calf. And that would be like the ultimate sin. What they did was pretty bad. but it wouldn't be as bad as replacing God with the calf. But they use the plural, so they make it into like a partnership, which is, bad enough, but not as bad. And that saved them from utter destruction. That way there was room for forgiveness, for keeping Hashem, keeping God in the equation. That's the first opinion in the Talmud. So according to this, it sounds like they still believed, that recognized God as creator but God as a partner, and it's this calf apparently. Then the Talmud brings another opinion. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai said to him, he's actually, there's a little paragraph in the middle. He's speaking to someone else who said the same thing, but he said, but isn't anyone who links the name of heaven and something else, meaning an idol, uprooted from the world? Meaning he's saying it's not going to help you. If you are saying God is a partner with someone else, with something else, with an idol, that's just as bad. He quotes a verse. It says, he who sacrifices to the God, save to the Lord only, shall be utterly destroyed. Verse Exodus 22:19. If you, it says, Bilti la Hashem levado. Only to God may you sacrifice. You can't serve anything. You can't have partnerships. So he says, no, that's not enough. That's not enough of a defense. If they are viewing it as a partnership, they would not have been able to be saved. Rather, he says, what is the meaning when it says, which brought you up in the plural? The verse teaches that the Jewish people desired many gods. They were not, that's commentary. They were not satisfied with the golden calf alone, but it has this line, they desired many gods. Kind of vague what that means. It says, they said, these are the gods who brought you up from Egypt. Comments Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai in the Talmud, it means that they desired many gods. So one of the great commentators, the Maharsha, explains that what this means is what actually was a common form of idolatry. Maimonides, when he talks about the history of idolatry, actually says that this is how everyone started off, which was that, you believe in God as creator, but they believed the first idolaters, and the same thing's going on here, that God appoints emissaries to run the world and then takes a step back and leaves it up to them, and they run everything. These the stars or the sun or the moon or a golden calf, whatever it might be, God puts it in the hands of these emissaries. If you want something, you go to them. If you want to pray to God's emissaries. You still recognize God as creator, but there's a belief that God has handed the keys over to other supernal beings, and that is another form of idolatry. And that, according to Maharsha, is how he explains that's what they thought was going on here. They desired many gods. In other words, they viewed this calf as one of many gods, which are all working under God. We talked about this last week, like an army. That this is still considered idolatry in our eyes, but that's what they thought. It's like God's the general of the army. He appoints, you be the commander of this, you be the commander of that, and I'll just sit back in my office and you take care of everything. That is what they thought. That is another form of idolatry. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai is saying it's not quite as bad as actually believing that God has a partner. At least they're emissaries of his, but it's still idolatry. It's still idolatry. And they would have been punished, but at least there was room for forgiveness. Now, this idea is quoted by Rashi in his commentary to the Chumash, to the Pentateuch, to the Parsha, and let's jump ahead to that for a second, which I think is a couple slides here. Here it is. Okay, so on the first verse here, it says, when the people saw that Moshe was late and coming down from the mountain, they gathered against Aaron and they said, come on, make us an Elohim that will go before us. So the Hebrew that will go before is actually plural. Asher yelchu lefanenu is plural. So it's gods that will go before us. It's plural. So here Rashi quotes the word yelchu, which means go, is plural form. They desired many deities for themselves. That's the same Talmud, Sanhedrin 63a, which we were just looking at. So here it's actually bringing it from a different verse, but it's the same idea. And it uses plural forms throughout this episode. And the idea is that they desired many deities for themselves, which we're explaining means that they viewed they were viewing the world as God God creates everything and then steps back and puts different supernal beings in charge of the world, and they were attributing the verse says these are the gods that took you out of Egypt. So they're attributing the Exodus to this calf somehow, which is a very strange thing, right? I mean, the whole thing is strange, but why on earth would they attribute the Exodus to the calf? So one idea that's suggested, this is the suggestion of Rabbi Avraham, the son of Maimonides, one of Maimonides' sons who has a commentary, Rabbi Avram ben Harambam, and he makes a very logical explanation, argument here for why they may have done this. And again, how it came to be a calf is its own discussion, which we'll get into. But he takes the approach that they wanted that. That's what they asked for. Aaron molded them a calf because that's what they asked for. They wanted a calf. Why would they want a calf? So for those horoscope fanatics who know about the zodiac, so you may know that the zodiac sign for the time of year where the Exodus takes place, Pesach time, is known as Taurus. Taurus is a bull, a cow, a bovine, right? So he says that they thought at this moment that how did the Exodus come about? It was God's emissary. Which emissary? So the Taurus, that one. That was the time of year. How do we get out of Egypt? God leaves the world. Again, this is an idolatrous thought, but God backs out. God creates all these supernal beings, supernal things, and they run the world on his behalf. And how do we get out of Egypt? Well, the Egyptians, I think especially, were into this stuff, and they said it must have been the zodiac sign for that time of year, which was the bull. So it wasn't that they thought that this cow itself, this golden cow that had just been formed, took them out of Egypt, but this was a representation of the idol that they wished to worship now, which was the Taurus, the bull, for having taken them out. Now he makes another interesting comment of how they got to this place. It's clear from the way that they say it. They say, why do we need this? Because this man, Moses, who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we don't know what has become of him. It sounds like if we knew that Moshe was coming back, right? They saw that he was late. If they knew he was coming back, then none of this would have happened. It's because he's not coming back. That's why all of a sudden they turn to this golden calf. Now, I don't understand that. If they think that it was the Taurus that took them out of Egypt, then what does it make a difference? Moshe is coming back. He's not coming back. Like, what does that have to do with anything? So he explains, Rabbi Avram, the son of the Rambam, that really, they did long for a direct connection with God Almighty, which they understood. Again, they weren't denying that there's a God over all the world. They just thought that he assigns, missions, or assigns, missions may not be so far off. He assigns power to other supernal beings, then that was an error of theirs. But ultimately, they really would have preferred to connect directly with God, to accept, they accepted the Torah. They wanted to connect through God in that way. But when Moshe wasn't coming back, they thought he was dead. They thought they lost that it was a lost opportunity. It wasn't going to happen now. If we don't have Moshe to lead us, Moshe is the conduit between us and God. He's our connection. If he's not coming back, we don't have that anymore. It's over. If he's not coming back, then we're going back to our old ways. In Egypt, the Jewish people were very much influenced by the Egyptians. And, they were also involved in idolatry. The Midrash says that when the Jewish people got to the sea, before the splitting of the sea, God's ready to split the sea, and the sea, so to speak, said, the angels said, why should we split the sea for the Jews? They're idolaters and the Egyptians are idolaters. What's the difference? So the Jewish people in Egypt had sunk to quite a low level, and themselves were serving idols. And now they said, okay, if we're not going to be able to serve God because we don't have Moshe, so we're going to go back to our old idolatrous ways and go back to idolatry, go back to serving the calf, and that was why they did this. And what we see is something, sad but important to be aware of is where this came from was really a lack of confidence in themselves. They didn't believe that they could do it without Moshe. If Moshe is gone, we can't achieve heights on our own. We just may as well go back to our old ways. And and that can happen to us too. Sometimes we will fall back into old habits because we don't believe that we can achieve on our own. We don't achieve that we don't believe that in ourselves enough to be successful. But if instead we push forward, if we push forward, then and push on and believe in ourselves and realize that we are capable of great things and of reaching great heights, then that will propel us to actually reach those heights rather than to just give up and go back to our old ways. That's what I see, at least from this little episode, this explanation. At least they gave up on themselves, so they went back to their old ways. Let's take a look at these comments. These are comments of Rashi, and he explains a little bit of the background story to why they thought that Moshe was late. So it says, when Moses went up the mountain, he said to them, at the end of 40 days, I will come within 6 hours. So within 6 hours from sunrise on the 40th day, he said, I'm going to be back. They thought that the day he went up was included in the number of the 40 days. But in fact, he had said to them, 40 days, meaning complete days, including the night. But the day of his ascent did not have its night included with it, right? Because he went up in the morning, and a Jewish day starts the night before. So that first day didn't count because it wasn't a full 24-hour period. So it didn't count for the 40 days. So thus, the 40th day of his absence was the 17th of Tammuz. On the 16th of Tammuz, the angel Satan came and brought confusion into the world and showed a semblance of darkness, pitch darkness and confusion, as if indicating that Moshe had surely died, and therefore confusion had come upon the world. He said to them, Moshe has died, for 6 additional hours have already passed, and he has not come. That's found in the Talmud. So basically what happened was they were supposed to count 40 days. The first day wasn't supposed to count, but they did count it mistakenly. So they got to day 40 a day early, and Moshe wasn't back. And then they panicked. And now what Rashi describes here, the Satan, right? The Satan is often is like the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. So we don't have to picture when we talk about this like like a red devil with like what is it, like a pitchfork and horns coming out of his head. This is simply the inner Yetzer Hara, the inclination that's with anyone. So it could have been that it happened to be on that day, because these things can all be arranged, right? But God and his messengers to test the people. And so it was dark, right? It was could have been a storm or whatever it was. But to them, it was perceived as, there's something dark going on in the world. And then they hear this voice. Was it a real voice? I don't know. Or it could have been in their heads, or somebody was prompted to say it. And they said, Moshe is not coming back. And it's in them. They're looking at the world, they're seeing something and gaining impressions from it, the wrong impressions. And the impressions that they gained were that Moshe was not going to be coming back. And the rest, yeah. Question? No. Okay. So that's how they end up thinking that Moshe is dead, and they panic, and they according to Rabbi Avram, the son of the Rambam, they give up on themselves basically, and they turn to the golden calf. The Taurus, that's what took them out of Egypt. That's what they think all of a sudden. Rashi continues on the next, we'll jump ahead here. Same verse. So here again, we have the Satan. This, they say Moshe is dead. So again, the Midrash says the Satan showed them something resembling Moshe being carried in the air high above in the sky. So again, they see something in the sky and they just assume, they think it's Moshe. Moshe must be dead. He's not coming back. Okay. Now let's jump ahead. Let's see. Yeah, I guess we should just mention what Asaf told us before, which is that in between, I don't think I put these Rashis on the page, but they're actually very important, which is that when they come to Aaron, right? They come to Aaron and they say, make us a God, make us an Elohim that will go before us. So what does Aaron tell them? He tells them, remove the golden earrings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, your daughters, and bring them to me. Why does he say that? So the Midrash, Rashi quotes, explains that he wanted to delay. These were the men who were getting, who were doing this. He said, go to your wives and ask them for gold to make a golden calf. And what he planned was that they'd go to their wives, and their wives would talk sense into them and say, what are you doing? What are you talking about? Moshe will be back. Don't you remember what happened? God took us out of Egypt. Like, what are you doing? So they go to the wives and they go to their daughters and their sons, and they ask for their jewelry, and they try to talk sense into them. They say no. So then that's why verse 3, the people themselves, the men themselves, stripped themselves. They also had earrings, and they brought those to Aaron. So Aaron was trying to delay them by telling them to go to their wives to get the gold. He was trying to delay them, but it didn't really work because the people themselves, the men themselves, just gave their own gold to instead. Now again, so then in verse 4, he takes it and it says he fashioned it. So let's see the commentary of Rashi on this verse 4. So Rashi explains to us that as soon as they are cast it into the fire of the crucible, of the furnace, how did it become a calf? So Rashi brings two ideas. Number one, two possibilities. The sorcerers of the mixed multitude who had gone up with them from Egypt came and made it with sorcery. What's the mixed multitude? It's what we call the Erev Rav. The Erev Rav was a group of Egyptians that when the Jewish people left Egypt, they wanted to come to. I mean, who wouldn't want to come to, right? They saw that God was working for the Jewish people. Things were great to be with the Jewish people. So they said, we want to come to these groups of Egyptians, but they weren't really strong in their belief. And according to actually many commentators, they were the leaders of this whole thing. They were the main participants in the golden calf. But besides for that, according to this, there were a couple of sorcerers among them. The Midrash actually says there were two sorcerers. It even gives us their names. One was named Yunus and one was named Yombrus. And remember, Pharaoh had sorcerers. Two of those sorcerers joined with the Jewish people, went out of Egypt. This is them. Here they are. And they, according to this, they formed the calf out of sorcery. So Aaron was trying to delay, it's going to take a while to make this into something. You got to melt the gold and you got to form it and it's got to dry, right? Harden. It's going to take a while. He doesn't have to delay for long. He knows Moshe is coming back soon. Right? He just wants to delay for another day. That's all he needs, 6 hours into the next day, and Moshe will be back. So first he says, try to get the earrings from your wives. Okay, that doesn't work too well. Now he's delaying again. He says, we'll put it into the fire and I'll make it for you. Right? Actually, very specifically, he says that he's going to be the one to do it. He didn't want them to do it. If they were going to be the ones to do it, they could do it faster. If you have a lot of people doing it, it could go faster. So I'll take care of it. I'll be the one to do it. So he's trying to delay. But what happened was, according to one opinion in the Midrash, is that the sorcerers that had come out from Egypt, they transformed it into a calf using sorcery. Others say that it was Micha. Micha was a fellow who actually, Moshe saved his life in Egypt. The Midrash teaches us. It says here he had emerged from the layer of building where he had been crushed in Egypt. Basically, he was crushed by some bricks. Moshe saved his life, I believe. And in the end, he turned out to make a lot of problems because one of the things that he did was this. When the Jewish people left Egypt, so Moshe retrieved Joseph's bones from the beginning of the Nile. And the way that he did that, Joseph has a corresponding animal. It's actually a ox, a shor. So Moshe wrote on a plate, and he wrote the words, Alei shor, ascend, O ox, ascend, O ox. He wrote this on a plate. He threw it into the Nile River, and the coffin of Joseph ascended to the top, and that way Moshe was able to take it and bring it with them to Israel. Now this guy, Micha, ran in after he jumped in the water to retrieve that plate, that little plate that said Ale Shor, arise ox, and he held on to it until this moment. He threw it into the fire. This was a special plate, and what happened? The calf emerged from the fire, and all of a sudden there's a golden calf. So two different approaches in the Midrash. One is that it was formed by the sorcerers. One is that it was formed because of this plate that Micha threw in. And we already previously mentioned that just on what we would call the pshat. The simple reading is, no, they formed it. They intended to form it as a calf. And they did that because they wanted it to resemble the zodiac sign of Taurus, who they attributed the Exodus to. That was the Rabbi Avram ben Aram. So different approaches to where we get the calf from. There's others. There's a ton of commentary on this whole topic, but that's a couple of ideas. Now, we're kind of, since we started a little bit late, we don't have as much time left. So I think we need to discuss the big question, which is, what were they thinking? How could this have happened? So we saw one approach, which the first approach that we've been discussing is really that this was a very, very grave and serious sin. Everybody will agree that it was a grave and serious sin. The question is, what was their intention? So far, the way that the Talmud seems to put it, the way that Rashi, the way that Rabbi Avram ben Aramam, all of these opinions that I'm quoting together so far, look at this as they really intended to make a deity of some sort, whether it was that they viewed it as a partner to God in the world, which is like the worst level, the Talmud seems to say, or, well, I guess a replacement for God would be the worst, a partner would be the second worst. The third worst, perhaps, is how they seem to be viewing it. Also, others is that they saw this as like an emissary of God, or representing an emissary of God, that God had given power to the either the calf or to the Taurus god. Those all view this as really they were intending idolatry all along. Many commentators explain otherwise, that they had other intentions with this, and it could be that it got out of hand, as can happen, and it ended up being worshipped, but that wasn't their original intent. So the first to present it like this, one understanding is mentioned by Rabbi Avram ibn Ezra. He has two different approaches, but one of them is that they wanted this to be a representation of God himself, so to speak. It's something to relate to God through. Not that it was its own idol, but it was to be a representation of God that they could relate to, and that too is forbidden. The Torah says, "Don't make with me gods of silver, gods of gold," and that means even to create an image that's supposed to represent God. Actually, in the Revelation, it repeats over, a number of times. They didn't see any image. I think we talked about this in one class. Why was it so important that they didn't see any image? Because if they saw some kind of image, then they would start to create a representation of God in an image, and God has no image. So we don't put God into an image, and that was their mistake here. That was what they were trying to do. They perhaps then ended up worshiping it on its own. That was their original intent. So it was a positive intent. They wanted to relate to God. Remember also, we're coming right off the Exodus. The Exodus, but also the revelation at Sinai. They've experienced this tremendous closeness to God. And they heard God speak. They experienced prophecy. It could be they were looking for some way to hold on to that. And the truth is that according to Ramban, that was ultimately the purpose of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, which they're going to build right after this, which was a way to experience a closeness to God similar to what happened at the revelation itself at Sinai. But they either didn't know that was going to happen, or they didn't want to wait for that to happen. They wanted something now. And especially in Moshe's absence, they felt they needed something, a new way to connect with God. And that's why they made something that I don't know why it would have been a calf. There are explanations actually that I think there's an image of a calf on God's throne. There may be explanations for why a calf, but for now we'll just say that was what they were looking for. They were looking for some way to connect to God. One of the great commentators, the Beis Halevi, one of the earlier Rabbi Soloveitchiks, the head of the Soloveitchik, the first of the Soloveitchik dynasty, the Beis Halevi says a very similar idea, but he builds it up, and he says, a person, you can have a person who's just an expert in all areas of Torah, Kabbalah, knows so much about how the world works, and such a person may be able to discern what it takes to create an abode for God in the world, right? So the Mishkan, the tabernacle, which they're going to build, it's not just a bunch of poles and curtains on top of it. Every aspect of the Mishkan has tremendous meaning. The tabernacle, there's tremendous meaning. It represents the world. It represents all of the realms of spirituality. There's a tremendous depth to it. Now, let's say somebody was able to discern that on their own without the Torah, without God commanding them to make such a tabernacle. They just decided, let me make a tabernacle. I understand how the world functions, the spiritual, and this is what I think would be great. And he goes ahead, he or she, and they make this tabernacle. Says the Beis Halevi, it wouldn't be the same. In fact, it wouldn't be anything, because it would be missing the most important thing, which is that God commanded it, that God expressed that it's his will that this be created. So if you just dream up the tabernacle, even if you dream it up exactly how ultimately God commanded it, but if it wasn't commanded, then it doesn't have the same or any importance to it. It's only because God says, do it. This is my will. Go. Then it all of a sudden takes on meaning. It says that was their error here. That's exactly what they were trying to do. They were trying to create an abode for God in the world. There was no tabernacle yet. They, again, coming off of the revelation where they experienced a closeness with God, we understand that. They wanted that closeness to continue. They wanted a place for God's presence to dwell. And that's what they were looking to form here. And the problem was that it's a beautiful idea, but if it's not what God wants, if God hasn't expressed that that's his will, so then it's nothing. It has no power. It has no meaning. And the opposite, on the contrary, again, the situation quickly deteriorated. And instead of this beautiful abode for God, you have people worshiping it and dancing around it. But originally, their intent was to actually perpetuate their great experience at Sinai. Things went awry. It didn't work out. That's the approach of it either was meant to be a representation of God or an abode for God. Either way, that's a good intent, but they were misled. It was wrong. It was a mistake, and it led to even worse things. Another approach is simply, if you read the verse, it says that they said, I'm trying to make us an Elohim that will go before us. Here they are, they're out in the desert, right? Moshe is their leader, and he's the one who led them out of Egypt. And now he goes up the mountain, and he's supposed to come back, and he doesn't come back. And if we go with the Midrash that Rashi quotes, they thought he was dead. They saw it was dark, and they saw an image of his coffin, all of that, right? So they start, understandably, to panic. Imagine a child in a large mall, right, with a parent, and all of a sudden, they turn around and their parent's gone, and the child looks all over, can't find their parent. They're in the Mall of America, and they can't find their parent, so they're freaking out. They're crying, right? They're scared. The child's scared. So what does the child do? There's no choice. You got to ask someone else for help, right? You have to go over to a stranger and ask them to help. Ask them to help. Help me find my way out of here. So here they are. They're in the desert, and they don't know where they're going, right? They're totally reliant on Moses to guide them. So it's somewhat understandable that if they think Moshe is dead, that they're thrown into a panic. And they look for something else to guide them. And the mistake was that Moshe actually told them what to do if they need something. He said, the verse says that he said, if you need something, go to Aaron and to Hur. Hur was another one of the leaders. Go to them if you need something. Well, I mean, they went to them, but they didn't ask, what should we do? They said, this is what we're doing. And actually, Hur said, no, you're not. So they killed him. Saying Aaron wasn't going to say, no, you're not. Right? So that's partially why he went along with it, or he tried to delay them, but he wasn't going to just say, no, you're not. It wouldn't have helped. They would have killed him, and then they would have done it anyways. So the mistake was that they were panicking. Okay, fine, but turn to your leadership for help. Don't just try to pave your own way, and instead they decide to create a calf that they think will lead them. Now, why they thought that the calf would lead them, again, is a difficult question. How it ends up with a golden calf, but one second. So one of the great commentaries, who has a commentary on the Megillah, which I really like. His name was Rabbi Eliezer Ashkenazi. He was like a 16th century, and he has a work on the Torah called Maaseh Hashem, the deeds of God, and he says that when he explains this, he says the Jewish people had complete faith in God. They totally believed in God. They totally believed in God so much they knew that God had promised Abraham, that his descendants would be slaves in Egypt for 400 years. Now, how long were they actually slaves in Egypt for? 210. So, or they were in Egypt for 210. They weren't slaves for all that time, but they were in Egypt for 210. So he says, the Jewish people, they had such faith that it was 400 years that they were so skeptical of everything that was going on with the Exodus because the time hadn't come yet. God said, the God of our forefathers said 400 years, and it's only been 210. Is this real? Is this really how it's meant to be? Or is this just Moshe, tricking us, trying to convince us? Is this really God's will? So every step of the way, they're wondering that. So over and over again, they're doubting him. That's why they're constantly doubting Moshe. He gives different examples. We don't have time to go through them now, but the same thing happens now. So at this moment, Moshe's not coming back. He's not coming back. They say, wait a second, we were right all along. Moshe was wrong, was tricking us the whole time. We're not really supposed to go out. Now there's tremendous amount of discussion why it ended up being 210 years, why it ended up being shorter. But they had tremendous doubt, and at this point, he's gone. So they say, that he was our guide. He was obviously not real, though. Obviously this was some kind of trick, and we need to go out and find something else. So they go to Aaron and they say, we need something else to lead us. Again, it doesn't explain exactly why they came up with this idea, with this calf, but it helps us understand their intentions, what concerned them. Let me just end with one idea in general, which is that what's Moshe's reaction when he comes down the mountain? So Moshe takes the tablets and he smashes them on the ground. He smashes the tablets. So we find something really fascinating with regards to that. And that is that if you go to the very last verse in the Torah, the very last verse, which is right after Moshe dies, the very eighth to last verse in the Torah is Moshe's death. And the very last verse is kind of just describing Moshe's strength and his great feats, his great accomplishments. And the very last verse says, it says, L'kol hayad chazaka, all the strong hand and the awesome power that Moshe did before the eyes of the people. All the great things that Moshe did before the eyes of the people, that's the last words of the Torah, before the eyes of the people. What is this referring to? What acts? What's the strong hand? So Rashi there comments that what's the strong hand? It's that he brought down the luchos. The strong hands of Moshe carried these very heavy tablets, the strong hand. And then it says that he did before the eyes of Israel. The very last verse of the Torah, the act that he did before the eyes of Israel. What act did he do before the eyes of Israel? Says Rashi, quoting Midrash, he broke the luchos before the eyes of Israel. He smashed the luchos. It's such a strange thing to close the Torah with, to end off, as if that was like a great feat in Moshe's, like to put on his resume, to put on his eulogy. Like this was somehow an amazing feat that he smashed the luchos. Why is this that he smashed the tablets? Why is this so significant? So one explanation that I heard once from Rabbi Frand is that a leader, to be a great leader, a person has to be willing to use ingenuity. A person has to have drive. They have to be willing to try different things. They have to be willing. They can't have any. They have to be willing to keep trying and not give up. To be a successful leader, you need that quality. But another quality that we learn from Moshe is you also have to know when it's time to smash the tablets. You have to know when it's time to say, listen, what I'm doing right now isn't working. I need to try something else. I need to start over. And not to start over with the Jewish people, right? That God wanted to start over. Moshe said, no, we can do this. Okay? He says, actually, erase me from your book. If you want to erase anyone, erase me. He puts it all on his own shoulders. But there's a very important quality. So while we talk a lot about the importance of not giving up, and I've spoken about it tonight already, of keep trying, but there's also a quality which is to know when you just have to start over. When something's not, to be able to admit that what's been going on isn't working. And that's a quality that we see at this moment in time. Moshe could have tried to stretch it, to just, don't worry, we'll work this out, we'll figure this out. But he doesn't do that. He realizes, and it's sort of admitting that he was unsuccessful to some extent. If his people, like we said, he was diminished by this, but he was ready to accept that and not just try to force it, not to try to force the issue. I'm going to smash this. We're going to start this over again, and we're going to figure out a way to make it work, but not to just keep forcing it, not to keep on going. So let me just summarize very quickly. I'm sorry it's late. We got a late start. Our main question for the day was how could such a thing happen? How could such an event happen? We wanted to understand Aaron's actions also. So Rashi teaches us how Aaron was just delaying. He was delaying and delaying. All they needed was to delay another day, but this happened and that happened, and the people just kept on pushing, and he wasn't able to delay enough. And ultimately, it was a calf. We said, why a calf? Calf was either representation of Taurus, who the Jewish people returned to their idolatry and were attributing the Exodus to Taurus, or it was just a manifestation of, again, maybe for that reason also, but something that the sorcerers of Egypt created, something that came about through that plate that Micha took that said, "Arise, ox," and he threw it in. But in terms of what they were doing, so again, we have some understand that they were creating an idol. They were creating an idol, and that's the most difficult to understand. But it could be that because they gave up on themselves, they didn't think that they could do it alone without Moshe, and they went back to their idolatry. That was one approach. Another approach was that they wanted a representation of God or an abode for God. And it was coming from the fact they had just come from the revelation. They had just come from such a close experience with God, and they wanted to perpetuate that. And again, things got out of hand and ended up in worshiping idolatry. The last approach is that they wanted some sort of guide. They never meant it to be an idol. I don't know how it was supposed to guide them, why they thought it could guide them, but they lost their guide. They lost their way. It's like being a child lost in the mall. And they looked for help. They turned to something else for help. And again, like all the other approaches, it also just deteriorated into something much worse, which is also, I guess, an important lesson to take away, which is in general, when we consider ideas, we also have to see what might come of it. And if the idea involves, creating an idol or something that looks like an idol, then we have to realize that it may deteriorate into actual worship, even if that was not the original intent. Okay. Thank you so much for listening.